The human desire to explore our world leads to discovery, uncovering ways to help each other live healthier lives, creating innovations that turn science fiction into reality. And now we're facing the most complex, pressing challenges yet. How will we create a more sustainable world? Ensure safety is for the many, not just the few. Make security part of everyday life. Our answer to these questions? It starts with safety science. We bring the ingenuity needed to engineer a safer world in which every individual can thrive. Researching emergent risks and sharing that knowledge, helping forge partnerships and move toward action, and developing the solutions businesses need to innovate with confidence. Our safety science is your advantage. You'll find our people partnering with leading organizations to create products we can trust, supply chains we can rely on, technologies that make automation the new normal. Safety science expands all our horizons. We are 3 distinct organizations. UL Research Institutes, UL Standards and Engagement, UL Solutions. United by one mission, working for a safer world. When we act together, we can solve any problem. Let's imagine a safer, more secure, more sustainable world and make it possible.
For 135 years, the Financial Times has used a couple of F words. Without fear and without favour is the phrase that set our agenda from the day we launched. We knew it was a bold claim, and no one expected fearless to be easy. Our journalists have investigated powerful people, knowing that they get angry, working offline to avoid being hacked while they ignored intimidation and even blackmail attempts. And when you ruffle big feathers, they set their big lawyers onto you. But the truth is always the most powerful case for the defense. Our editors know that reporting without favor is non-negotiable, even in their own friendships. Like when we raised doubts about a global ad boss and staunchly opposed a UK chancellor. We refused to let go of the truth, so our journalists refused to be bullied, as one reporter proved when she exposed sleaze in the very heart of the city. Because we've always known that taking on the highest levels of the establishment would demand courage and determination, and that it always will. So as we move into the future, we'll make sure that we never stray from the motto that the FT reports without fear and without favour.
How the Ukrainian people have responded has at least awakened the world in a way that indicates how one person, a handful of people, a group of people can move the conscience of the world.
And I am always so thrilled when we have young people that are stepping forward and saying, I really want to engage. I want to be part of my community and find solutions for my community, for my state, for my nation. I love that.
I think the biggest opportunity that my generation has is actually here right now. My generation is already doing everything to address the climate crisis. We've been organizing and mobilizing strikes, climate education, community reach outs, and running different projects in our communities for years.
Everyone in this room has obligations to one another. Evo and I have them to one another. You all have them. And we all have them to this country, the government, to authority, and to this country. But it's almost a distribution or a decentralization of effort. Teachers have certain obligations, journalists do, business leaders do, parents do, religious authority, congregational leaders do. It takes the cumulative effort of all these individuals in our society to get us to where we want to go.
Artificial intelligence is reshaping our world. AI can provide localized climate predictions that save lives in a natural disaster. It can answer questions and surface helpful resources, but initiatives like predictive policing have shown that AI, without ethical and transparent implementation, can worsen existing inequalities. This is why it's imperative that leaders in government, the private sector, and academia come together to understand the promise and the potential pitfalls of AI. Collaboration, transparency, and trust are major components of successful AI implementation. So let's curate a toolkit of best practices for AI from leaders around the world who are already leveraging its power. The Pritzker Forum on Global Cities presents Harnessing AI, Tools for Urban Leaders.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for being here for the first panel of the day. I'm Elaine. I'm the Deputy Head of the Lex column at the Financial Times. We're going to be talking today about the ways in which AI is going to have an impact on the workforce, or is already having an impact. This is, of course, a subject that causes some concern and some argument. Is AI going to create new jobs, raise productivity, make all of our lives easier? Or is it about to eliminate jobs and increase unemployment and turn us all into drones? That's what our panelists today are going to discuss. We have Danielle Lee, who's joining us virtually, Associate Professor at MIT Sloan School of Management. We have Alison next to me, Director of Strategy at SkyHive Technologies, and Brenda Darden Wilkerson, CEO of Anita Ball, a nonprofit working to create opportunities for women and non-binary individuals in tech. Thank you so much all for being here. Danielle, I'm going to start with you. And the paper that you recently published, co-authored, Generative AI at Work, it received a lot of attention because you had some fairly positive findings about the impact that AI can have in a workplace. Can you talk us through what those findings were?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm hearing an echo. This is a little bit on. So there's clearly been a lot of conversation and speculation about the potential impacts that generative AI technologies might have on workers and their jobs. But since these technologies are actually very new, there hasn't been that much research on what happens in practice. And so what we do is we study a company that actually introduces generative AI into their workflows. The setting is workers who are providing technical customer support. So, you call someone up and you chat with someone about some problem that you're having. This is an area in which generative AI has increasingly been adopted. And so what the company does is they give access to an AI-based conversational assistant to their workforce. So it's not replacing workers. It's sort of giving them a tool that's giving them suggestions on how to speak with customers about the problems that they're having. And so we find a couple key results. The first is that productivity goes up quite a bit on average. So we see a 15% improvement in the main productivity metric, which is the number of customer issues that these workers are able to successfully resolve in an hour. But the second one, I think what's interesting is that effects are different across workers. And in contrast with a lot of studies of previous technologies where technologies have been shown to benefit the most skilled, what we see with the generative AI example is that it actually helps workers who are less skilled or newer on the job. And so what we find is that the average effect is 15%, but really that comes from a 35% improvement, which is very large for the lowest skilled workers and for the newest workers, and basically a zero impact on the best workers. And so what we find also is that newer workers are able to learn faster. And so if you compare a person who's been on the job for about 2 months, but they have access to the AI assistant, they actually perform as well as, if not better than, someone who didn't have access, but who has been on the job for sort of 9 months to a year. And then lastly, I think one of the other results is that it seems to improve not just productivity, but the experience of work from the worker's perspective. I think we talk a lot about how AI can take away people's jobs, but we often forget that lots of jobs are kind of unpleasant and emotionally draining. And I'm sure that many of you have had customer service interactions in which it was anonymous and you did not bring your best self to that interaction. And so these are situations where workers basically take a lot of it. And if you're not good at your job, you can get yelled at more. And so what we find is that AI actually improves how customers treat workers. And as a result, we see better employee retention. And so those are sort of some of the main line results from the paper, although obviously it's very preliminary and it's based on things can change in the process.
I should mention that there is time for a Q&A at the end, so think of questions if you have any for our panelists while we're speaking. That figure that you mentioned, that 35% improvement, that is enormous. Can you explain exactly how you're measuring that productivity increase?
Yeah, sure. So one of the nice things about looking at sort of contact center work, so customer service work, is that it's one of the types of jobs for which we have better metrics on how well people perform. And so it's a variety of metrics. The main one we have is basically the number of customer issues you're able to deal with successfully in an hour. And that's a combination of a few things. It's a combination of your ability to actually resolve someone's problem. So problem solving skills. The second is your sort of speed, how quickly you handle a given call. And then the third is how well you multitask, or how well you're able to sort of handle multiple calls at once that you're dealing with. And so we see improvements along all of those dimensions. The average effects are coming mostly from speed, but then you also see, especially for the newer workers or for the lower quality workers, improvements in problem resolution, the idea that you actually resolve the problem, as well as increases in sort of surveyed customer satisfaction.
Alison, so the paper that Danielle's co-authored, I think that's one of the first pieces of research that has been produced that has come up with some concrete figures. In your work, have you come across any companies that have come up with any sort of figure that compares to that?
Well, not having access to our clients' specific employee data, I do think the use case of a call center worker is one of the most interesting. So Danielle presents one application of AI, which is a guide on the side, helping workers to be more productive, helping guide them towards things that the data shows have optimal outcomes in terms of Net Promoter Score, the client is satisfied, the issue is resolved, it's helping upskill and reskill and onboard faster and more efficiently. And in doing so, it's bringing the lowest common denominator employee up to a higher standard of performance. I thought it was interesting that maybe at the high performer level, they didn't experience a net productivity increase, but in SkyHive, which is a skills intelligence platform that harnesses the power of the global labor market and its data and puts it to work on behalf of individuals, organizations, and communities, the use case that we might see there is something like SkyHive technology being able to take those very productive and optimally positioned workers in a call center and actually surface their skills to them and show them how their skills and skills adjacencies could help them navigate to higher value adding opportunities within a single company. So I can't name the name of the employer, but in a previous role prior to SkyHive, I worked across many different enterprise employers to upskill and reskill their employees at Coursera. And one was a very large travel services agency, had a massive call center arm. And they brought us in because they had found that their high performers in the call center actually made excellent sales enablement, experience design, product managers. They were able to move into much higher value back office operations. And it had gotten to the point where their technology arm was poaching from their call center arm in order to find that very scant pool of skilled workers that's just not available in today's tight labor market. So I could see the applications of AI being twofold. One, helping you perform better in your current role and onboard efficiently, but also helping you understand the art of the possible for all the adjacent career paths that might not be in you or your manager's field of vision, that actually help companies close those persistent vacancies and skills gaps more effectively without necessarily trying to squeeze blood from a turnip in today's labor market.
So you're imagining the idea that it's not just one particular sort of skill set that could be improved with this technology. This could be applied across all jobs, across all skill levels.
Absolutely. If you can answer the questions, what skills do I need? What skills do I have? What is the difference between the two? And how can I most efficiently close that gap? You can do quite a bit, either as an individual and have a very personalized experience with that. Whereas before, some of the skills intelligence and skills AI that we're seeing now in the marketplace, this was very difficult to do. It required a lot of big data synthesis. We're now able to put that down to an individual level of personalization, as well as aggregate it to a community level, a state, a city, a country. That's really exciting.
Yeah. Brenda, I wanted to ask you about this point that Danielle made about the idea that it wasn't just a positive experience for the customers, but actually for the people in the workforce as well. They were having a better time interacting with customers. In your line of work, is this something you're already seeing, the idea that it could be an improved for productivity, but for the person who's working?
Absolutely. And I think the important thing to think about in zeroing in on some of the type of workers that would be in these roles, right, is the many times they are opportunity youth, or they're people who have less education than we're expecting them to have. And so giving them this type of support is going to allow them to excel. And it's also going to expose them to their employer and to other opportunities in ways that we've not done in the past, right? So it's an opportunity for companies to rethink, and cities, in the same way, to rethink the skill set that's available to these workers. The challenge many times in cities with opportunity youth is we don't know what to do with them. And now we have an opportunity to make them as productive as we know they can be. We've already seen that happen in other areas, but in a lot slower pathway. And so what we can see is with the satisfaction of being able to do a job well, these people will open their minds to other opportunities that they'll seek, right? And they'll take roles that we haven't seen them take before. And so I see that as a very positive impact that, we should do more of.
Do you see any resistance from people, and particularly younger people, in the idea of working alongside a chatbot or being trained even by a chatbot?
Not young people. Right. Right. No, that's a problem for the rest of us, right? So, especially most young people today are digital natives. And so they are reaching out and using the technology in a way that's actually helpful to the additional generations as a bridge to help them understand how to use it. I've seen that in my workforce where the younger people, and that's what's good about multi-generational workforces, right? You have people who are learning from each other based upon their experiences. And so the digital natives are the ones that are seeking out this type of support, this type of learning. In fact, we see that many times as an organization that runs a large conference, one of the things that we've learned is the digital natives, the younger people, are less likely to come and sit in a room like this. They're going to seek out that training in ways that are AI enhanced, right? Because it's readily at their fingertips. They can just go to it and get it when they need it, which means they're going to skill up faster in many cases than those that are not.
Than us.
Yeah, than us, yeah.
Danielle, can we go back to the research? I just wanted to ask you a few more questions to understand it. So what you found was that the use of generative AI chatbots improved productivity because it seemed to aid the work of the most productive agents. Can you help us understand why that was?
Yeah. I think that actually, so far the conversation has been very positive, and I think I do want to sort of lay out some of the sort of the more complicated parts. So one thing that I think is very interesting about AI-based technologies relative to other kinds of technologies is it used to be that when we have computers, what computers were good at is that we gave them instructions. We told them exactly how to do something, and it was able to do it. So for example, clerical work, we teach it how to send an email or how to do accounting work. And so computers used to be really good at doing things that we had instructions for. But there's a lot of work that we actually don't have. We do a lot of work that we don't really have explicit instructions for. So what does it mean to be a good teacher or to motivate someone well? Or to be empathetic, for instance? Those are things that are harder to sort of give computer examples for. What machine learning as a class of technologies does is that it doesn't require instructions as an input, like how to be empathetic. What it learns from is examples. Here are examples of people serving customers well. Here are examples of people serving customers poorly. So you give them a lot of examples. And what it's learning is essentially what types of actions are correlated with good outcomes. And because most AI-based, most AI models are trained on human data, human-generated data, what you're essentially doing is you're learning about what it means to be a person who's good at their job versus someone who's bad at their job. So the AI is kind of learning what makes someone good at their job, even if that person can't explicitly explain what makes them good at their job. And so I think that actually really changes the notion of how we think about productivity in ways that can be good for workers, but also sort of challenging for workers. in the sense that you imagine that you're someone that, if you're a customer service worker, if you imagine any other kind of worker, and you're really good at your, it used to be the case that the thing that made you really good at your job was something that was kind of inside you and you carry it out, put it in, into your interactions. But if we live in an increasingly data-rich world, increasingly a world in which there's a lot more surveillance on the job, what's happening is that as you're doing your job well, you're leaving pieces of that. There's sort of records of your conversations, records of how you're moving about the workplace. And all of that stuff is going into inputs into AI models. And so essentially the thing that's making you good at your job is becoming kind of disembodied from you and repackaged as a technology that can then be sold to help other workers improve their productivity. But importantly, you're not paid for that.
Yeah.
And so one of the things I think is kind of challenging is thinking about, in our setting, for instance, you see these workers who are providing examples of how to be productive. It is making their colleagues far more productive, but their own productivity hasn't gone up and their wages haven't gone up. And I think in terms of thinking about how we manage technologies on the workplace, rethinking this idea of what constitutes productivity. It's your interaction with the customer, but it's also your contribution to training data sets that is a big part of productivity. And thinking about how we manage that, I think, is important.
And can you just give us an idea how large was this data set? And was the idea to only pick customer agents who were good at their jobs? Is that how the data was managed?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because so the data set consists of millions of conversations, but you can imagine different companies. I mean, it's sort of an interesting thing about the economy now where the structure of it was that we had a third-party company that was providing the AI software. They were training. They had many client firms, and we had data from one of their client firms. And so they could be using data from other. So if I'm a worker in a company, and oftentimes it's a complicated subcontracting where I could be living in the Philippines working for a call center who then is subcontracted to by American firms looking for their workers. My data, which is sort of owned by kind of, there's my data is my direct employer, who's the call center that's outsourced. Then there's the company that's sort of hiring my employer. Then there's the AI companies that are using all that data. And so it becomes really interesting to think about who owns that and who pays for it.
So it gives the to the fissured workforce. It's like an extra layer of fishing with the advent of AI.
So is this possible? Can we democratize benefits of this already?
I don't think it's too late for anything yet. I don't want to get away, given that this is a conference on urban innovation, from how excited I am that we're having a workforce conversation as part of an urban innovation conference. I'm an urban economist by training. I've been in this field for 25 years. I've been to a lot of urban conferences, and workforce is often a scant mention on the agenda because the agenda focuses on the sexiest use cases, physical capital, the built environment, the art of the possible, futurism, very technocratic concerns. And now we're reaching push has met shove. And we're in a moment where in order to activate any of that capital, in order to do anything with some of the historic investments that are being made in infrastructure, green technology, et cetera, we have to bring an entire class of workers and make them conversant in digital capabilities that they're not today conversant in. And that's going to change a lot of systems that we have that our cities have direct influence and states have direct influence in. So I really want to focus this is an amazing research that shows a microcosm, but I want to extrapolate that out so that city leaders and government innovators can really understand the role that they play, because it is relatively within their control. And I think it is also their obligation to help smooth some of the rough edges of this transition rather than sort of leave surveillance capitalism to the worker to sort of navigate and figure out. They're not going to be able to do that on their own.
Well, can you pinpoint what moment in time we're at with this technology then, and in what way city leaders can start to be involved right now?
The paper was published in April, which, as you recall, is right after GPT-4 dropped. And so GPT, the large language models are still evolving, and it's a relatively nascent field, as is the field of skills AI and skills intelligence. Entirely less than 10 years old, probably. And I think it'll continue to evolve and it'll continue to advance. But I would say we're still quite early days. What I'm a little bit concerned about, I'm excited because we're at a moment where cities, particularly American cities, are modernizing their technology. It has reached the end of its useful life in most cases, and core technology systems are finally being replaced and modernized with cloud solutions. And many of those have capabilities that align and can partner constructively with AI and skills intelligence. But what I'm a little concerned about is in workforce conferences where state leaders and city leaders attend, they're also, have so many reservations about the potential harms of AI that they're throttling some of their staff's ability to experiment with it, learn about it, and become conversant in it. Corporate enterprise is not placing similar throttles. And so there is an opportunity where we might get a mismatch in terms of public and private sector, one moving very quickly ahead with this technology and the other sort of adopting a wait and see posture that ends up putting a lot of vulnerable people at a disadvantage.
Brenda, you were nodding to that. I know that your background was in education and the use of generative AI in education has been a very controversial topic. Is that what you've seen as sort of blanket refusal to accept the technology?
I to be fair, I would say that it hasn't been a blanket refusal, but there are pockets, right? There are people who still, I remember I was discussing this panel actually with my son last night, who was one of the first students when we created a new CS requirement here in Chicago of my kids that actually got to take it, right? So he was talking about, was it 7 years ago that we were in a space where there were professors from various universities and they were talking about this new thing that was coming and that these students were going to be cheating because they were not going to be studying for themselves. They were just going to ask the question of this thing and was going to give them the answers. And what are we going to do about it, right? And I said, yeah, I remember that too. And some of that is still out there, right? And I see it more. So, and it's not just that issue. It's the difference in our technical education areas where we have students, engineers actually learning these important underlying skills that create this technology. And then the arts and sciences where they're still being throttled, right? Don't use it, right? And so that's going to be, I think, one of the challenges about the different tiers of educated people coming out of our universities, some understanding and going in and actually going into leadership and running these organizations without the understanding, with the fear that's been built in the educational institutions. So we still have a lot of work to do. We are making progress. I think that one of the additional things we need to do, again, from my experience in working in K-12, is to really open up the aperture around what the opportunities are for that educational space. And not so much for the kids. Again, the kids are going to jump in and learn what we give them to learn. It's the grown-ups. When I used to do the work around bringing technical education in the district, people would always say things to me, and maybe some of you can relate to this. Oh, those kids and those urban schools, right? Well, it's not the kids. It's the grown-ups, right? So really some of the work with public-private partnerships that work really well is when there's an education for the administrators, for the counselors, for the people who provide the gatekeeping, as it were, for the kids or open up the gate. And so that's where I would say to city leaders to form those partnerships that allow for information to flow freely, not just of the opportunity, but also of some of the challenges, because we need minds that can address those challenges. We can't pretend like they don't exist. And the students that are coming through K-12 have some pretty fresh ideas about that. We want them to be applied.
I'm wondering what the sort of skills are that could come into the workplace now. Maybe this is a question for you, Alison. What are the skills that somebody could arrive to a new job with that would put them ahead of everybody else in terms of utilizing AI?
Ironically, if you ask employers, it's less technical skills and certainly more human skills. And you and I were talking just before the panel in the green room around, well, if large language models can give you an answer, what would you need to learn the substance of that discipline for? Well, large language models, as Danielle mentioned, are trained on data, human-generated data that's generated by fallible humans. So there's I do think there's a need to have that grounding in understanding enough about the data and the context of how the data was created and how it's being used in order to know when a large language model or a GPT or an AI or a machine intelligence is potentially misleading you or drawing an erroneous conclusion. And we can't delegate that thinking to the machine. That's critical thinking. That's one of the most important skills. And I think we also talked about metacognition, understanding. I was talking with somebody at breakfast this morning that universities in EMEA, in Europe, in the European Union, have really pushed back and said, the role of a university is to teach you how to think, to teach you how to teach yourself things. Metacognition is also a huge skill that will be largely needed in the future because the nature of how we upskill as this technology evolves much faster than any degree program we could pursue, if we could afford it, will require us to be largely self-teaching, knowing what we don't know, knowing how to go get the information, knowing how to teach ourselves, and knowing how best we learn. And I think that creates a very agile, versatile employee that is in very high demand, whether they have hard technical skills or not. And there are a lot of people who are not technical who work in tech, myself being one of them.
So I guess part of it is to be able to look at the sort of things, research like Danielle has done, and to assess it and analyze it and think about how it can be applied. Danielle, you mentioned there that not everything surrounding this research was positive. I wonder if you can tell us what the limitations are, where you think the research is useful and where we have to not apply it to the rest of the entire workforce.
Yeah, the key is that these technologies are new. And so we don't have years of data or years of organizational change accompanying this. And so the data that we have comes sort of 6 months in. And I can sort of tell you sort of positive stories or negative stories about how it can evolve. So here's a sort of a story that I think would be more negative for the workforce. But basically what happens is that it used to be that you have to have some real skills to sort of work at these jobs. So the data that we have, you're looking at financial services software. People have to understand accounting and they have to understand tax law. They have to understand a bunch of things in order to help customers. If not ChatGPT, but like if sort of generative AI technologies make it so that you don't need to understand these things, it's true that lower skill workers can sort of do better on the job. But then that entire job could possibly get sort of de-skilled. So if you think about, it used to be that back in the day, if you were a Starbucks barista, you actually had to sort of learn how to sort of make an espresso shot. And now what you have is you have a machine that Starbucks invested in, and now you press a button. If you make it so that the only skill you need is to press the button, then you don't actually have to train workers as much. You don't have to pay them as much. And then after you leave the job, they might not gain more skills. And that's something that can happen in the future if sort of what's happening is that the skill it takes to do a job becomes increasingly embodied in the technology rather than in the worker. In our setting, one of the nice things is that actually we looked at periods in which there were software outages. So the AI is supposed to be available if it's not working because of some technical glitch. And it turns out that workers who are exposed more to the AI do better without it. So this seems like there's some durable learning. But you can also imagine another case in which what's happening is that customer service is an unpleasant experience. No one wants to call unless they desperately need to. If it becomes a less unpleasant experience, then what you might happen is that you might actually call and to sort of deal with a lower level set of issues. The company can then use that as a way of discovering what their customers want, what kinds of products they need, in which case the fact that this is now sort of more productive increases demand for that area. It increases the types of skills that you want workers to have. And that's something we really don't know yet. We don't really have a good sense of whether these technologies, and it's going to depend on the situation, about whether they're going to enable it to sort of be a stepping stone for people with maybe lower skills to begin with, but then they learn and they can expand their skills on the job. Or it can be a situation in which this is sort of a job that's kind of permanently a lower skill type position in which people don't have as many mobility opportunities. And I think a lot of that has to do with how companies respond. It's not just a technical question, but an organizational question.
Or the job is eliminated altogether. If you have voice technology and an AI chatbot, do you even need the person as a call agent? I'm wondering, Brenda, if this is something that is a reason that cities should be concerned about this technology. Do you think it's legitimate, the idea that we could be eliminating a lot of jobs all at once?
Well, we know that is the fear of the populace. And I don't think that is a good choice, personally. for economic reasons, creativity reasons. Danielle, your concern about the technology beginning to embody the skills is a real one. And I think it has to do with, what are our motives in using the technology? Is it really to improve the ability, improve the...
So you're about to say something, it doesn't lie. You just questioned its motives, not
right?
not happy about it.
I rest my case. No, but I think that we have to, we need to think about the human side element. This is a historic problem. As we've increased technology over time, we think of the computer, the system as it, and it becomes this thing that is non-human, that becomes more powerful than the humans that are using it or that is assisting. And so then we seek solutions that use more of it than us. That's a choice. And so we have these opportunities to make choices that don't do that, that use the technology in an assistive way so that we don't end up in some dystopian place where people are only pushing a button. And I think that's a fear that we need to address, and we need to make sure we are not part of that downward slide.
And then we all equally need to make sure that we're not missing the moment. Have you seen examples, or can you think of examples in which the public sector has missed the moment with technology and advancements that the private sector has gone forward with?
Well, I mean, the public sector many times is slower at adopting technologies. We've seen the work that we've done at our institute is to reskill and replace and refurbish the U.S. government with technical people. The average age of the technical workforce in the federal government is 63, I think the last we checked. And nothing against 63-year-olds. We won't talk about who's 63 here, but at some point we need to make sure that there's a pathway in. Well, the problem was that people didn't understand that there was a career in the federal government for technical people, and that those systems actually offered opportunities to technologists that could launch their career. And so part of what we had to do was to make that obvious. We also had to make it easier for people to actually get into those jobs. It's very hard to apply and get accepted and move through that process. And so cities have that same challenge and opportunity. We need to let the technologists who are flowing into private, because private tells them, here are opportunities over here, come over, here's what's going to happen to you, here's what you're going to get to do, and here's what it's going to do for your career. We need to do the same thing in our cities. And if we do that, then we're going to have some of the same fresh ideas implemented in those spaces as well.
There's a lot more questions I want to ask about data security, the cost of this technology, the sorts of skill, but I'm also conscious of time. And if there is somebody in the audience who has a question for one of the panelists, there's a handheld mic that is somewhere. Oh, it's behind. There's a lady in a white jacket there.
I will say that while we're waiting for the mic run, just to draft on your statement, Brenda, in 2022-23, when tech was hemorrhaging and experiencing massive amounts of layoffs, many U.S. cities attempted to recruit some of those displaced tech workers into their own IT divisions with very meager success. And it wasn't just because of a low pay or something like that. It's in many cases, 1 in 7 Americans works for the public sector. Government should think of itself as one of the largest employers, larger than some of the largest multinationals. And so to start with oneself, we've seen in the US in the past 18 months, 18 states remove degree requirements and start to adopt more measures of skills-based hiring and skills-based practice for the civil service. OPM is considering it. They're working on it at the federal level, but this is something we've not seen as much in cities as I think the possibility exists for it in cities. And so I'd really encourage the folks who are attending Pritzker Forum this year to really think of yourself as an enterprise also, in addition to a policymaker or a regulator when it comes to AI, and really think about how you can enable the tens, if not hundreds of thousands of workers in cities and states to really be the thrust of this workforce reskilling that we're talking about. Alex.
Hey, everyone. This is an awesome panel. Thank you so much. Danielle, I would love to follow up on your point earlier on the nature of productivity. I'm Alex Sportzel, by the way, from Jobs for the Future. This question of workers' data that's beginning to be used in training models and where some workers could contribute significantly and others maybe less so, or even questions about representation in those data sets when you think about the degree to which workforces are representative of broader population. I'm wondering for all of our policymaker colleagues in the room, what questions should they be asking employers or others in their areas that are starting to think about leveraging these kinds of training models in their own workforces about how they are engaging with employees? What questions should they be asking, the ways in which they should be thinking about potential compensation for the use of that data? I know the conversation's very nascent. I'm just curious what some of the questions would be that folks in the room should be asking as this starts.
Well, maybe let's start with Danielle. And did anyone who was involved in your study, did they ask about how the data is going to be used if there was going to be any compensation?
My sense is no. I think it sort of happens. Yeah, workers don't feel sort of sufficiently empowered on these issues. I mean, I think that a broader way, and I don't have a great answer to that question, which I think is a great question. I think a broader way that I sometimes think about it is that I think we need to start thinking as policymakers about data infrastructure the same way that we think about infrastructure for water, for electricity. There's a way in which we're building models in very ad hoc ways. And so if you think about sort of AI or machine learning as a predictive technology, it gets applied to all sorts of things. So you can think about, using information on bail decisions to make algorithms that decide whether or not we should give bail to people, or what algorithms for whether or not we should give credit to people, loans or hiring, things like that. And so we're using the basic same kinds of AI models where you take a historical training data set, you sort of find patterns on it, you build a new model and you apply it to the future. But we do it in very, very different sort of data environments. So for example, if you were to build an algorithm that decides whether or not someone should get a loan, you're going to use data on loans and which loans were given out, who applied, whether they were repaid. And a lot of that data infrastructure is actually sort of maintained by the government in the sense that you can get public information about certain loans that were given out, there was regulations about what data needs to be provided. When we talk about data, AI models in the labor force, there's actually, as far as I can tell, very, very little sort of policy or guidance or regulation around what kind of information you should have. So for example, should we record information on, how many applicants showed up to particular jobs? Should we have information on their demographic, their background? And it's not to say that there's a specific answer, but I think the fact that there's no guidance or no sense of, that we can take it, it's not just the data, whatever data exists. It's so we can sort of make decisions about what kinds of data we want to curate, which kinds of data we want to allow or disallow, what reporting we want to have about the nature of the data that gets used in these algorithms. And I think that's important. And I think it's also important to think about what the sort of ideal data is. So if you were making an algorithm for resume screening, what you actually want is for every single applicant that you might ever encounter, you want to have representative versions of that person. So, who had similar qualifications, similar backgrounds, and you want to see how well they did in those positions on the actual job, like how well they actually performed. But in practice, not everyone has an opportunity to perform every job. And so we're starting from a data set that's actually very, sort of very low quality relative to what we actually want. And I think it's important for policymakers to keep in mind what the ideal is. And then from there, think about what are the kinds of decisions we can make in terms of certain things to be recorded or captured or used or shared to improve the nature of kind of the inputs into these algorithms that are getting made regardless.
Thank you so much. I think there were some more hands at the back. There's a couple. Right, will you let us know who you are and who your questions for?
Congratulations for the panel. And the question is, it's clear that most of these non-creative workers will lose their job and will be replaced by an artificial intelligence. So probably will be sent back home with a universal basic income. But in my opinion, the problem is not the workers, but the kind of jobs. Well, everybody is creative by DNA. The jobs are not. So should we create in the public sector more creative jobs?
I think that's probably a question for Brenda.
I have my opinion.
You're in the right place.
Yeah,
Sure.
absolutely. I feel like the way and Danielle, I really, I'm getting some of this from what you said, is the way we've structured jobs may not have been, if we can use the algorithm analogy, may not have been the most efficient algorithm. It's historically based upon what we've replaced pieces of it or elements of certain processes. And we've sort of made a decision. Okay, here Brenda's really going to go down her opinion pathway. We've made certain decisions of what's valuable and what is not in terms of getting a whole process done. And then we add that to the people. And that's where we start to say, well, this isn't as valuable. So therefore, the people who are doing it aren't as valuable. And so we sort of like sweep those things that are what we feel to be unattractive into those roles overall. We've done that across history in our societies. So now what do we do about it? And I think we've known some of those things, but what it may cause us to do is really stop and rethink an entire process in a way that we don't feel like we have the time to do in the race to be successful, in the race to be first. And that's going to be the challenge. Yes, I totally agree. We're creative. We're at birth. You can watch kids who learn to use technology without us teaching them. Shows you that they know how to create. And I think that brings us back into the educational system. What types of things are we preparing people to do? What are we taking people who we're going to need to reskill because the jobs are changing? And what are we training them to do? What are we expecting that their experiences can contribute to the creation of this new economy? That's a more philosophical answer, but the resources that cities put into this sort of conversation, the types of public-private partnerships that you engage in and encourage nonprofits into that conversation will help decide the types of new jobs that we might consider creating training around.
I'll note that our job in talent architecture dates back and has not changed significantly since Ford era industrial production models. We've treated people as assembly line inputs, and labor as like an input to creating widgets. And we're now in a moment where we have a vastly different economy. We're still very much trying to put a static job architecture onto it. This is something that AI can aid in the transition of a more fluid way of thinking about talent and job architecture. There's also, I want to challenge the notion that we by committee have to design what that future of jobs and future of work looks like. I'm not sure that AI will wait for us to do it the way we've always done by committee, in a bureaucracy. I'm not I started my life in local government. So I know that, there's good work to be done here, but I also know that we've been talking about this for 25 years and technology has only continued to accelerate during that time frame. Everything you've said today has made me want to bring up David Graeber and his most famous book, Bullshit Jobs. If you have not read it, please read it. It really encapsulates this loss of creative work and the idea that embedding our humanity and our creative energy into technology and becoming button pressers might not serve anyone, least of all the worker. And I think you can see the potential societal impacts of taking meaning out of work in that way. So my hope is that we will make a choice to use AI in ways that unleash human potential and actually, inspire creativity and free up our minds to do some of that and maybe a little bit less of the BS that David wrote so poignantly about years ago. He saw this coming a long way off.
Sounds good.
We'll need to continue to do the research, right, to see the impact that on the workers and on what we call success of the job as we continue to roll out these technologies. We need to keep our finger on the pulse.
Any more questions? There was someone at the back. Here we go.
Good morning. I'm Minnesota. I'm with the Aspen Institute. My question is, could AI aid in improving manager, staff, team culture relations? I worked at a call center in 2017. It was different. And a lot of people left, not just because of the technology or how customers treated them, but it was the relationship between your supervisor, the team culture. So I'm wondering, Danielle, if your work informs any of that, and if there's a way or if there's research or learning on how this technology can improve relations um, on team culture.
I'm going to we'll throw the question to Danielle, and then maybe Alison, you can give us some thoughts as well. So Danielle, I think your paper found that it did improve the life of the worker.
Yeah, so we weren't able to sort of look at culture per se, but one thing that we found is that, so I alluded to this earlier, this idea that even when there were outages, when the AI assistant wasn't working, the people who had spent more time using the AI did better, even when that technology was taken away, which suggests that it had a learning component to it. And I think that one of the opportunities here is training. So in the sort of pre-AI world, managers would meet with the workers about once a week, and they would go through sort of a selection of calls they had dealt with and kind of give suggestions for how to improve. But there's a lot of heterogeneity in sort of how well managers do that. And oftentimes you hear stories where people said, oh, I looked at your calls and it would be great if you just worked faster. Or they gave kinds of suggestions that weren't super helpful. And so I think what's nice about the AI model here is that it can give you a concrete example of what it means to be empathetic or to ask questions. So for example, one of the things that workers didn't do well is that they would assume that there would be an answer. They know what the answer is and start trying to solve that hypothesis without really making sure that that's actually the problem that the customer is having. And so what the AI model actually asks you to do is to ask a lot more diagnostic questions to get a better sense of the problem before you try to solve it, because then you don't waste as much time. And so being able to see examples of how people are doing things well, I think is really useful, especially in a world where the skill that people are missing it's sort of hard to explain, like what it means to do this right. So seeing a lot of examples, I think, can kind of help training, which is not exactly your sort of question about culture, but I think it does speak to an ability to improve some aspects of kind of it's sort of the team relationship.
Is culture just too much of a big ask for generative AI?
I think that there are things that AI can do that can set the table for better interactions. So, Danielle was commenting a moment ago about the quality of performance data. And we know that in many cases, performance evaluations are flawed, highly subjective, biased. Like, even if you did them categorically, you would probably still get trash in your data that's more reflective of manager psychology than anything else. But I think using the example that she just laid out, this provides an objective point of view for both people to discuss something and to discuss it on the same terms versus the very human nature of, well, I saw the conversation going this way and the other person has a very different frame and very different filter. If you extrapolate it out higher, what we see at SkyHive is the ability for organizations and managers to use AI to really understand the innate strengths and skills of their team. Most people don't have a good handle on what their own skills are. And when it's surfaced to them, they have sort of a revelatory aha moment. Same for their manager, who may not understand the skills of their team or how best to optimize those skills. And when it comes time for that, employee, when they're thinking about maybe making a change, this also helps guide internal mobility options that previously a manager might not see or might see but not share with that worker because they don't want to lose a good member of their team. And we see now that more and more organizations realize how imperative it is to retain talent and to give them internal pathways and to surface those pathways and make it very transparent, because that ultimately improves employee engagement and people feel as though there is some place for them to go. Pew did a survey maybe 1 or 2 years ago and found that one of the top reasons that employees leave an organization, other than having a bad boss or a bad manager, is because they don't see a future for themselves and they don't feel invested in by the employer in the form of their own learning and development. So those are just a couple of ways that AI can very simply set the table for a better dynamic and a better culture where people feel like their skills are being used well, and that they're being valued in ways that without it are sort of left to chance or left to just hoping that you have that really good manager who gets it.
We have time for one last question. There was some hands at the back that I saw.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi, my name is Jonathan Williams Kenzel. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer with the City of Long Beach, California. Um, I loved everything that you all said today. One of the biggest questions that I have a challenge in my recent role is telling an organization they're transitioning from a compliance format, which many local governments are, to an impact. And unfortunately, sometimes we have leaders that are still on the governance model while we have these challenges that are so dynamic today, and we're being required to bring people into these challenges that we have that no longer look as homogeneous as we've looked in the past. And so how to pace to leadership, not just at the mayoral level, but like even the city manager level, which is one of the most conservative form of government that we have, to make the case of how to re-engineer their organization for problem solving and impact, and particularly, and how AI isn't the solution for that, but a tool in bringing them that way.
Brenda, I'm going to ask you to finish us up with an answer to that very considered question. Thank you so
Well, I
much.
mean, that's a difficult challenge. I think the more that you can get people into the organization, or you can partner with organizations that can help tiers of management understand this challenge, and they're not like walking into a store, grabbing something off a shelf that's just going to be the panacea to fix all their problems, which is many times how they're seeing these AI solutions. That's going to be the gradual change that you'll see happen. They have to believe. And in order to believe, they have to understand. And so working with people who can speak to them about the very same challenges that they're having, maybe it's another consortium of mayors opportunity where they can get together and see what another city has and be able to believe it. Otherwise, they're going to go on some preconceived notion about what this thing can do. And it won't be until, as you're already seeing, you're down the road a bit, and things really stop working for them, that they're able to listen. So being able to give them someone that can understand and has been through the type of transition that you're talking about is probably going to be the best way to get them to be open to this sort of change.
That's all we have time for. Thank you so much for all your questions. Come find I'm throwing our panelists in hot water, but come find our panelists to chat more about this, because I know there were more hands up at the back and some more questions. Thank you so much to our panelists for talking about this such an interesting subject. So get some nice of a hand. Thank you so much to Danielle Lee, Brenda, Darden, Wilkerson, and Alison Lands, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you so much.